Hi.
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 Hi!
Hi.
I am Erica Janice Ramos, but you can call me Teacher Kang, the one who will lead the energizer for today's discussion and also the reporter of the different kinds of utilitarianism.
Isang mapagpalang araw sa lahat. Ako si Binibining Doreen K. Gomez at maaari niyo akong tawaging Teacher K. Aking ipapaliwanag ang principle of utility, gayon din ang objectives ng aming topic.
Hello, BSED Phil 1. My name is Leslie Bernal. In this topic, I will discuss the hedonistic principle, aggregation theory, and the connection between utilitarianism and ethics. Also, together with Ma'am Eka, we create the PowerPoint presentation that you will see later.
What a pleasant morning we are having. The sun is beginning to shine. I'm one of your teachers for today's video and I've been tasked with explaining what the consequentialist sub-theory is. I'll also introduce you to the two founders of the utilitarianism and explain their contributions. Before I get into that, let me introduce myself. My name is Nicole Visaya and you can call me Teacher V.
I am Teacher J from Set B, and today I will discuss the meaning of utilitarianism and also the history of utilitarianism.
And we
Are.
What? Before we start the presentation of our group, let us have a prayer first. So, let us bow our heads, clear our minds, and close our eyes and feel the presence of our Lord. Dear God, we thank you for the blessings we have received and are receiving in our life. We ask for your guidance as we gather this morning. Guide us to have a meaningful and interactive discussion that can expand our knowledge in both academics and everyday life. Bless our family, bless our friends, our classmates, and our professors, and also bless the reporters, the strength and wisdom to lead the class and instill the learnings we ought to know about our subject. Calm our heart that full of worries, fill our minds with learnings. May our class discussion be filled with peace, knowledge, and hope. We thank you and praise your name with all of us, our Lord God. Amen.
Isang mapagpalang araw sa ating lahat. Bago tayo dumako sa talakayin natin sa umagang ito, halina't magbalik tanaw po muna tayo sa ating pinag-aralan. Nakaraan ay pinag-aralan natin ang patungkol sa right theory. According to Merriam-Webster, na ang definition ng right is being in accordance with what is just, good, or proper right conduct. In terms of right theory naman po, na ang action or decision that respect the rights of other people will be considered ethically correct. The keyword for this theory is respect. No? Ang mga legal or moral na karapatan daw ay maaaring talakayin sa mga tuntunin ng mga teorya ng karapatan. Ang mga karapatang moral ay karaniwang itinuturing ng mga pribilehiyo na taglay o likas na taglay ng isang tao. Ayon kay Immanuel Kant na ang morality po ay hindi daw nababase sa ating emotions or experience. And he argued that morality must be based on reason. Dito, ipinaliwanag ni Kant ng birtud bilang isang uri ng lakas o katatagan ng kalooban upang gampanan ang mga tungkulin sa kabila ng panloob at panlabas na mga hadlang. At dito din ay meron siyang dalawang tinutukoy. Una ay ang larangan ng etika na may kinalaman sa moral na mga layunin, saloobin at kabutihan. Ang isa naman ay larangan ng katarungan na may kinalaman naman sa mga karapatan at tungkulin na maaaring pilitin na ipatupad.
Thank you, Miss Janice. Ang objectives ng aming topic na utilitarianism ay ang mga sumusunod. Explain utilitarianism and the founder of it. Examine the two kinds of utilitarianism and evaluate the two principles of utilitarianism.
Before we we formally start the discussion, let us have our energizer first to be led by your one and only Teacher Kang. Now, the energizer prepared by our group is entitled Finding Hint O. So, from the title of the activity itself, we are going to take a look carefully at a crossword-like activity to find the hidden words with the help of the hints that are related to the topic that we are going to discuss later. Paalala lamang po, habang kayo ay naghahanap ng words sa ating crossword-like activity, ay ako naman ay binabasa ang hint kada item. Pagkatapos kong basahin ang hint ay maghihintay po kayo sa aking signal na magtaas ng kamay para sagutin ang item at kung sinong swerteng matawag ng ating mga moderators ay siya ang sasagot. Ngayong tapos ko nang ipaliwanag ang direction ng activity, halina tayo'y magsimula na.
Is the correct answer utilitarianism? Let's find out.
Thank you so much, BS80 Phil 1. We, Group 1, hope that you enjoyed our energizer for today's discussion. I am now passing the spotlight to Teacher Lai for the overview of our topic discussion.
Hello, Biz! Edifil 1. Mukhang nag-enjoy kayo sa inihanda naming activity na pinangunahan ni Teacher Kang. We hope na hindi lang kayo nag-enjoy, kundi may napulot din kayong aral. Ngayong araw, marami tayong pag-uusapan at for sure, marami kayong matututunan para mas maintindihan natin ng lubusan ang aming topic na utilitarianism. Ngayong oras ay bibigyan ko kayo ng konting kaalaman o hint patungkol dito. Diba ang saya? Halina't tayo nang magsimula. Una na nga dito ang utilitarianism and ethics. In this part, malalaman natin kung ano ang pagkakaibahan ng utilitarianism at ethics. Pag sinabi natin utilitarianism, ito ay isang ethical theory that determine right from wrong by focusing the outcome. Pag sinabi naman natin ethics, ito ay tumutukoy sa rules or guidelines that establish what conduct is right and wrong for individuals and for groups. At ayan ay tatalakayin mamaya ni Teacher J. Ngayon, tayo naman dumako sa hedonism theory o hedonistic principle. Pag sinabi nating hedonism theory, ito ay isang philosophy of living life to experience pleasure and avoid pain. At ito naman ang aking tatalakayin mamaya. At ang isa pa sa tatalakayin ko mamaya ay ang aggregation theory. Ngayon, tayo naman dumako sa susunod na topic. Ito ang consequentialist theory. In this part, malalaman natin na ang consequentialist ay isang ethical theory that judge whether or not something is right. That we'll discuss by Teacher V. Ngayon, tayo naman dumako sa susunod na topic. Ito ang founders of utilitarianism. Sa parting ito, marami tayong makikilalang tao. Sila ay hindi basta-basta dahil sila ay mga philosophers. At ayan, muling i-discuss ni Teacher V. Now, let's proceed in the next topic. Ito ang principle of utilitarianism. Sa parting ito, sinasabi ng principle of utilitarianism na we should act as to produce the greatest good for the greatest number of people. At ayan ay di-discuss mamaya ni Teacher K. Ngayon, tayo naman dumako sa susunod na topic. Ito ang kinds of utilitarianism. Sa topic na ito, hindi lang iisa yung kinds ng utilitarianism. Hindi lang din dalawa, hindi din tatlo, kundi may 9 kinds of utilitarianism. Now, let's proceed in the next topic. Ito ang connection between utilitarianism and ethics. May connection ba yung utilitarianism sa ethics? Atin yan malalaman mamaya. Ang mga sinabi ko kanina ay magsisilbing hint lamang. Mamaya, ipapaliwanag namin isa-isa upang maintindihan natin kung ano ang nilalaman ng utilitarianism.
So now we proceed in our lesson, which is utilitarianism. Ano nga po ba ang utilitarianism? Utilitarianism is an ethical theory that determines right from wrong by focusing outcomes. Ang nag-establish ng utilitarianism ay si Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. In ethical philosophy, ang utilitarianism ay kabilang siya sa normative ethical theories na nagpe-prescribe ng actions at nagmamaximize siya ng happiness and well-being sa bawat individual. So, utilitarianism is a consequentialist theory of ethics and morality. Ang isang ethical na teorya ay kilala bilang isang utilitarianism. Ito ay nagtatatag ng tama sa mali sa pamamagitan ng pagbibigay diin sa mga resulta. Nilalaman nito yung mga consequentialism sa ilang paraan. Ayon sa utilitarianism na ang desisyon ay maaaring magresulta sa pinakamalaking kabutihan para sa pinakamalaking bilang ng mga tao. So, it is consequentialist theory because what determines whether a given act is right or wrong are the consequences of the act. According kay John Stormell na ang desisyon ay may particular na consequences. Let's say yung plan mo is good, then basically, there's a possibility na good din yung kalalabasan niya. But if in the first place na sablay na yung plano mo, syempre ano pa bang aasahan mo sa huli? Maaari ding sablay yung kalalabasan niya. So, utilitarianism is what is good is what is useful, no? What is useful is what is good. So, we have to set morality in this perspective of the community. Kung maganda nga yung plano mo or maganda ito para sa ibang tao, people will be adapted this. Pero if ever na hindi naman nila to gusto, people must be rejected. No? Like for example, the word of majority. Nag-majority kayo, then pinipilit mo pa rin yung gusto mo or pinagpipilitan mo yung gusto mo kahit hindi naman yun yung gusto ng ibang tao. So, ano pang purpose ng majority kung sarili mo lang din yung susundin mo at hindi yung gusto ng nakararaming tao? So, kung ano ang sinabi sa majority, yun ang dapat nating susundin because majority speak what is right for other. Isa pa sa halimbawa nito is may 4 na pasyente sa ospital na nangangailangan ng liver, kidney, heart, at lung transplant, no? ikaw, willing ka na i-donate yung mga organs mo para masagip yung 4 na buhay. Kung titingnan natin, bibihira lang yung tao na handang gawin yon. At maaari din na magresulta ito ng isang pinakamalaking kabutihan para sa pinakamaraming bilang ng mga tao. Gayun pa man, no, iilang tao lang ang itinuturing ito na pinakamoral na paraan ng pagkilos. At lalo na kung ito ay katanggap-tanggap. Utilitarianism also has trouble accounting for values such as justice and individual rights, no? So, once again, utilitarianism's our decision making perceiving the good must be seen and contextualize what is useful to what is pleasing to a particular community. Now, let's proceed in the history of utilitarianism. Sinasabing nag-origins ang utilitarianism at ito ay na-trace sa Epicureanism of the followers of Greek philosopher Epicurus. Sinasabing ang ethical universalism ay nakita sa doctrine of the rival ethical school of Stoicism and Christianity. Si Jeremy Bentham ay isa siya sa pinakamataas at ginagalang na scholar sa ilang mga disiplina, particular na yung mga batas, no? Kung saan siya din po yung nag-ambag sa pagbuo ng legal na positivism at isa din siya sa mga nagtatag ng utilitarian. Nabalangkas sa kanyang pag-aaral, which is influenced future writers such as John Stuart Mill. Huwag po tayong malilikto kay James Mill at John Stuart Mill. Si James Mill po ay ang ama ni John Stuart Mill na siya namang nabuhay, no? Isa siyang pilosopo na nabubuhay noong panahon ni Bentham. The utilitarian principle, which Bentham described as the principle of the accepts or disapproves of every action according to the propensity it appears to have to increase or lessen. Naniniwala si Bentham na ang pundasyon ng karanasan ng tao ay kaligayahan at ito ay ating pulid upang suportahan o salungatin ang kaligayahan ng tao o grupo na ang interes ay pagtanungan. Si Bentham po ay tumitingin siya sa direktang karanasan, no, kaysa sa relihiyon o supernatural para sa pundasyon ng moralidad. Naninindigan din si Bentham na ang utility ay maaaring kalkulahin at ang mga paghahambing ay maaaring puhit. Halimbawa na lamang po ay ang isang bagay na nagpapasaya sa'yo sa loob ng isang segundo ay hindi kasing husay ng isang bagay na nagpapasaya sa'yo sa loob ng isang oras na diretsyo. Ang dami ng taong napapasaya o nalulungkot, ang posibilidad na ay may kahihinatnan at ang iba pang variable ay maaari ring makaapekto sa pagtutuos na ito. Ayon din kay Bentham na tinuturing siya bilang isang hedonist, isang tao na nag-iisip na ang moral na kabutihan ay binibigyang kahulugan sa pamamagitan ng paghahangad ng kaligayahan o kasiyahan. Sa kanyang gawaing utilitarianism, si John Stuart Mill ay gumawa ng malaking contribution sa konseptong ito. Kilala si Mill sa iba't ibang bagay, kabilang na katotohanan na siya ang unang British MP na nagtaguyod ng mga karapatan sa pagbuo ng kababaihan sa House of Commons. Sinulat niya din yung pilosopiyang pampolitika tulad ng On Liberty na may mahalaga ito para sa mga liberal. Mayroon din siyang iba pang punto na nagkakahalaga na napagbanggit para sa ating mga layunin. Una sa lahat ay sinulat ni Mill ay nagsisilbing haligi sa utilitarianismo. Kasama ang kanyang mga depensa sa teorya na ito, ang mga argumento na sumusuporta dito ay nagsisilbing hindi mapag-aalinlanganan ng panimulang punto para sa pagsasaliksik dito. Ang maikling libro ay nagkakahalaga ng pansin na isang mausisa sa isang mambabasa. Ang pangalawa ay iminungkahi ni Mill ang pagkakaiba sa pagitan ng mas mataas at mas mababa kasiyahan. Ayon kay Mill na ang ilang uri ng kaligayahan ay mas makabuluhan kaysa sa iba. Sabi niya, better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. And for the matter, better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool who is happy. Ang utility para kay Mill ay mas komplikado kaysa sa kaligayahan sa simpleng kahulugan. Hindi lahat ng utilitarian ay sumasang-ayon sa ideyang ito. Ang act utilitarianism at rule utilitarianism ay ang dalawang pangunahing utilitarian na binubuo mula pa noong panahon ni Mill at Bentham. Si Joseph Priestley ay isang English descent clergyman at naging famous siya dahil sa discovery of oxygen. Si Claude Adrien Helvetius naman ay isang French author ng Philosophy of Physical Sensation. Si Cesar Beccaria naman ay isang Italian legal theorist and Job. Last is si John Gay na isang English biblical scholar and philosopher at sabi niya, the held of will of God to be criterion of the virtue. Noong early 19th century, si James Mill and other adherents of Jeremy Bentham were proponents of parliamentary reforms in England in beginning of the 19th century. Ginawa nila ito batay sa mga argumento ng utilitarian para sa kinatawan ng gobyerno at universal. Si John Stuart Mill ay nagsulong para sa mga kababaihan, nagsulong din siya ng libreng pampublikong edukasyon para sa lahat at iba pang ideya ay makikita bilang isang radikal. Batay sa mga prinsipyong utilitarian, nagsulong din siya para sa karapatang palayain ang pagsasalita at patan na rin ang laban sa paghihimasok ng gobyerno o lipunan para sa pribadong aksyon na hindi nasasaktan ang iba. Mill's work, Utilitarianism, ang pinakamahusay na pagpapakilala sa paksa ay ang sanaysay ni John Stuart Mill na Utilitarianism na unang inilathala sa Fraser Magazine noong 1861. Sa loob nito, ang utilitarianism ay tinuturing na parehong legal at etikal na sistema para sa pang-araw-araw na pag-uugali. Noong late 19th century naman, ang utilitarianism ay isa sa nangingibabaw na teoryang etikal na ginagamit noong sumusulat si Wig na pinakamasusing pagsusuri ng mga kahihinatnad ng utilitarianism bilang isang patnubay para sa personal na moral na pag-uugali na matatagpuan sa kanyang Methods of Ethics noong 1874. Isang paghahambing ng egoism, ang etika ng sentido komun at utilitarianism. Ang teoryang utilitarian ay sumasailalim sa ilang mga pagbabago at komplikado noong 20th century.
A pleasant morning, BSED Phil1. It's me again, your teacher Lai. Thank you so much, Teacher J, sa isang napakagandang talakayan. In utilitarianism, may tatlong theory. Una nga dito ang hedonism, aggregation, at consequentialist theory. Bago tayo dumako sa ating talakayan, may tatanong muna ako. Naku-curious na ba kayo? Kung ikaw ay mabibigyan ng pagkakataon na i-plug o i-connect yung brain mo sa isang machine na kung saan pag naka-plug yung brain mo doon, habang buhay mo mararamdaman ang kasiyahan o pleasure at wala kang mararamdaman na pain o sakit, papayag ka ba? I will give you 5 seconds para mapag-isipan ito ng mabuti. Ups! Time's up! For sure, karamihan sa inyo sumagot ng oo. Sino ba naman ang may ayaw sa habang buhay na kasiyahan? At sino ba naman ang may gusto makaramdam ng pain o sakit? Ang katanungan na ito ay galing kay Robert Nozick. Mamaya, makikilala natin kung sino nga ba si Robert Nozick. At kung ako ang tatanungin ni Robert Nozick, ang isasagot ko ay oo. Papayag ako. Ngunit paalala, sa buhay hindi kailangan o hindi maaari na puro pleasure lamang. Dapat may pain din tayong mararamdaman at may mga hirap din tayong mararanasan. Parang ganito lang yan. Tayo mga future educators, kailangan natin maramdaman lahat ng hirap, lahat ng sakit habang tayo ay estudyante pa lamang. Para pag tayo ay isang ganap na teacher na o guro na, maiintindihan natin yung mga students natin o yung mga mag-aaral natin kasi dumaan na tayo sa ganong sitwasyon. Kaya, ang habang buhay na kasiyahan ay malabo. Hindi tayo mabubuhay sa realidad kung puro kasiyahan lamang. Ngayon, atin ang kilalanin si Robert Nozick. Si Robert Nozick ay pinanganak noong November 16, 1938. Isa siyang American philosopher. Si Robert Nozick ang kauna-unahang nag-introduce ng experience machine through experiment back in 1974 to support the idea that happiness requires pleasurable experience that are in contact with reality. Sa pamamagitan ng machine o pag nakablog na yung brain mo sa machine na yon, ang tanging mararanasan mo lamang ay kasiyahan. Maaari mo din gawin ang lahat ng gusto mo o lahat ng ikakasaya mo. Imagine a machine that could give you any experience you might desire. While you connected in this experience machine, you can have the experience of writing great poem, bringing about the world peace, or loving someone and being loved by return. Crushback yarn. Also, you can experience the felt pleasure of these things, how they feel from the inside. You can program your experience for tomorrow, or this week, or this year, or even for the rest of your life. Ngayon, napapaisip na ba kayo sa inaalok ni Robert Nozick? If not, why not? Na atin ang nakilala si Robert Nozick at nalaman na natin kung ano yung experiment niya at yung katanungan niya. Alam niyo ba na ang experiment ni Robert Nozick ay nakapaloob sa hedonism? Ngunit, ano nga ba ang hedonism? Utilitarianism is a hedonistic principle that seek pleasure and avoid pain. The word hedonism came from the ancient Greek hedoni, meaning pleasure. In short, pag sinabi nating hedonistic principle, maximizing net pleasure is the most important thing in life because pleasure is the greatest good that life has to offer. Ang pinaka-the best na magagawa ng isang tao para sa kanyang sarili ay ang greatest amount of pleasure. Limitless pleasure minus 0 equals to maximum net pleasure. Again, limitless pleasure minus 0 pain equal to maximum net pleasure. Kung iisipin natin, ang hedonism ay isang simpleng kasiyahan lamang, tulad ng paglalaro sa mga nalaglag na dahon o pag-bonding with friends and relative or families at pagyakap sa mga aso ay masasabi na yung pleasure o kasiyahan. Ang paghahanap at pagmamaximize sa mga ganitong uri ng kasiyahan ay maaaring magpalakas ng ating kalusugan at ito ay tinatawag na hedonism o hedonistic principle. Paano nga ba nagiging negative ang hedonistic principle? May negative din ba ang hedonistic principle? For sure, dahil lahat ng bagay ay may negatibong resulta. Tama ba? Halimbawa, ako ay may boyfriend. Tapos yung boyfriend ko ay nag-cheat sa akin o niloloko ako. Siyempre, pag nalaman ko na niloloko niya ako, ang mararamdaman ko ay masasaktan ako. Ibig sabihin, hindi ko na-avoid yung pain. Pero kung hindi ko malalaman na niloloko ako ng boyfriend ko o patuloy ako magbubulag-bulagan, ibig sabihin, iniiwasan ko yung pain at ang gusto ko lang ay pleasure o kasiyahan. Ibig sabihin, hindi ako nabubuhay sa realidad. Para mas maintindihan natin kung ano ang hedonism, ating i-define yung pleasure at pain. Pag sinabi nating pleasure, ito ay enjoyment or kasiyahan. Pag sinabi naman nating pain is a signal in your nervous system that something may be wrong. Ngayon, tayo naman dumako sa types ng hedonism. Ano-ano nga ba yung mga types ng hedonism? Makikita natin to sa PPT. Types of hedonism. Una na nga dito yung folk hedonism. Pag sinabi natin yung folk hedonism, it is a combination of motivational hedonism at hedonistic egoism. Ito ay isang reckless lack of foresight. Next one is value hedonism and prudential hedonism. When we say value hedonism, it reduces everything of value to pleasure. For example, a value hedonist will explain the instrumental value of money by describing how the things we can buy with money, such as food, shelter, and status signifying goods, bring us pleasure or help to avoid pain. Ayan ang sinasabi ayan yung ibig sabihin ng value hedonism. Now, let's proceed in the next types of hedonism. Ito ang normative hedonism. Pag sinabi natin normative hedonism, ito ay isang teorya that happiness should be pursued. Ibig sabihin, ang kasiyahan should be pursued and the pain should be avoided. At ang normative hedonism ay may two major types. Ano-ano ang mga to? Ito ang hedonistic egoism at hedonistic utilitarianism. Pag sinabi natin hedonistic egoism, ito ay isang theory that we should, morally speaking, do whatever we want to do or do whatever is most in our interest. When we say hedonistic utilitarianism, right action is the one that produces the greatest net happiness for all concerned in hedonistic utilitarianism. Ngayon, tapos na natin talakayin ang mga types ng hedonism. Ngayon, tayo naman tumungo sa mga ideas nito. Ang hedonism ay may dalawang idea o two ideas. Ito ang preference hedonism and prudential hedonism. Ngayon, tayo naman dumako sa prudential hedonism. The prudential hedonism view is that life goes better if it is more pleasure and less painful. In short, prudential hedonism is a dead end. Kasi hindi naman maaari na puro masaya lang. Bakit ko nga ba nasabi na ang prudential hedonism is a dead end? Because living for a good life is a dead end. Ngayon, tayo naman dumako sa isa pang idea at ito ang preference hedonism. Sinabi ni Derek Parfit na ang preference hedonism, life goes better if it contains more experiences of the kind that one desires. Ibig sabihin, kung ang prudential hedonism ay focus lamang sa pleasure sensation, sa preference hedonism naman ay nagko-contain ng anything we desire at the moment to experience, the greatest of pleasure on this view is proportional to the strength of one desire to have that experience. Ang hedonism ay may two ideas. Ito ang preference hedonism and prudential hedonism. Mamaya, malalaman natin yung kahulugan na yan. Ngunit, bago tayo tumungo doon, may ipapakilala muna ako sa inyo. Siya ay si Derek Parfit. Ngunit, sino nga ba si Derek Parfit? Si Derek Parfit ay isang British philosopher who specialized in personal identity, rationality, and ethics. Siya ay pinanganak noong December 11, 1942 at namatay naman noong January 2, noong 2017 at the age of 74. Muli, may papakilala ko sa inyong dalawang tao. Sila ay si Jerome Bentham at si John Stuart Mill. Ating alamin kung ano ang pleasure para sa kanila, kung paano nila i-define yung pleasure. Ayon kay Jerome, that pleasure can have quantitative aspect to it like duration, intensity, and certainty, and more. Ayon naman kay John Stuart Mill, pleasure can have qualitative aspect, meaning the type experiencing or want to experience. Kung kay Jerome Bentham, ang pleasure sa kanya ay maaaring magkaroon ng quantitative aspect, kay John Stuart Mill naman, ang pleasure maaaring magkaroon ng qualitative aspect. Kanina, akin ang naipaliwanag kung ano ang hedonism. Ngayon, atin naman alamin kung ano ang kahulugan o ano ang nilalaman ng aggregation theory. Para naman sa consequentialist theory, si Teacher B ang magpapaliwanag sa atin kung ano ang nilalaman nito. Ngayon, tayo na dumako sa aggregation theory. Pag sinabi nating aggregation theory, ito ay what will be the whole outcome? Sa madaling salita, kung ano ang magiging resulta ng iyong ginawa. O diba, napakasimple lang. Ngayon, akin naman tinatawagan si Teacher V para magbigay pa ng mga ilang kaalaman patungkol sa utilitarianism.
Muli, ako si Teacher V and I will discuss who developed or the founders of the utilitarianism. But before that, I will introduce to you what is the classical utilitarianism or what we call consequentialist theory. So, ang consequentialist theory ay part ng utilitarianism. So, consequentialist theory said that we are morally required to do what produces the best outcome. So, from the definition itself, consequentialist is one of the sub-theory of utilitarianism. So, ang consequentialist theory ay bumabase sa resulta ng isang aksyon na iyong ginawa. And this is vague compared to the utilitarianism that more on specific. So, halimbawa nito ay kunyari ako ay nangako sa isa kong kaibigan na ako ay dadalo sa kaarawan ng kanyang anak. Ngunit, yung isang shop sa mall ay nagkaroon ng stock ng paborito kong libro. So, yung libro na to is yung desired ko talaga, yung gustong-gusto ko. So, at itong libro na to ay limited edition lamang. So, may 3 stock lang doon sa mall na yon, doon sa specific na shop na yon. So, ang oras ng pag-open ng shop ay 5 p.m. Ngunit dahil nga mabilis maubos yung libro na gusto ko, dapat umaga pa lang nandun na ako at nakapila. So, yung kaarawan naman ng anak ng kaibigan ko ay gaganapin sa isang resort at ito ay may oras na 3 p.m. So, hanggang 5 p.m. lamang yung birthday nung anak ng nung kaibigan ko. So, ayun. So, madaming bisita sa birthday ng anak ng kaibigan ko. At ako ay common friend lang. So, hindi niya mapapansin kung dumalo ako or hindi. Since common friend lang ako, hindi yung pinaka-closest friend or best friend, common friend lang. Nakilala niya ako sa kaibigan niya lang. So, according sa consequentialist theory, it is morally right to do is to not attend the said birthday party. Instead, go to a mall and grab the desired book. So, bakit ko nasabi yun? Dahil ang sabi sa definition ng consequentialist theory, sabi kanina na ang consequentialist theory, he said that morally required to do what produces the best outcome. So, ano yung best outcome? Ang best outcome is yung nakamit mo, yung inaasam-asam na libro mo, or yung libro ko. So, bakit ko ba ini-introduce sa inyo ang consequentialist theory? Dahil ang consequentialist theory and ang utilitarianism is parehas lang na sumasagot sa tanong na, what should we do? Or ano ang gagawin natin? So, ngayon na naintindihan niyo na ang consequentialist theory, tumako naman tayo sa mga founders ng utilitarianism. So, first, what is utilitarianism? So, utilitarianism is the theory that we are morally required to do whatever produces the greatest total of pleasure minus pain. So, utilitarianism is founded by Jeremy Bentham and developed and popularized by John Stuart Mill. So let's start from knowing who is Jeremy Bentham. So si Jeremy Bentham ay pinanganak noong February 15, 1748 sa London in England and died on June 6, 1832 in London. Siya ay isang philosopher, an economist, and theoretical jurist. So he is the author of An Introduction of the Principles of Morals and Legislation. So that was published in 1789, where he introduced the utility or the utilitarianism and famously held that humans were ruled by the two sovereign masters, which is the pleasure and the pain. So he said that we seek pleasure and we avoid the pain. So according kay Bentham, happiness is simply the absence of pain. So Bentham introduces the philosophic calculus. So it is the philosophic calculus is the measure, the degree of happiness or pleasure that a specific action may produce. So ibig sabihin, ito ay paraan o ang philosophic calculus ay paraan upang isukat kung ang action ba na isinagawa ay naghahatid ba ng pleasure or ng pain. Ito din ay tinatawag na utility calculus o hedonistic calculus. So it includes the intensity, duration, certainty, propinquity, fecundity, purity, and extent. So the extent, the pleasure, the better. The longer it lasts, the better. The more certain that it will happen, the better. The closer that will occur, the better. The greater the possibility that it will be followed by another pleasure, the better. The purer the pleasure, the better. The greater the number of people that it benefits, the better. The philosophic calculus formula is the happiness minus pain. So, happiness minus pain is equals to balance. So, as stated by Bentham, the balance is the basis of the morality of an action. If you sum up the result of the action, you will get happiness or you will get the pain. Halimbawa na lamang dito ay may 5 kang kaibigan na kung saan kayong 5 ay kakain sa isang restaurant. So may 2 lalaki, isang mahaba ang buhok, isang maikli na buhok na babae at isang bata. So kumain kayo sa restaurant and after the meal, you ask them to rate their happiness or pain from 1 to 10 or yung scale na 1 to 10. So the number with a long hair, yung sinabi niyang rate niya sa happiness is 8. So she reached 8. So the one with the shorter hair, she said that she felt 2 out of 10. Then the 2 boys both said that they felt happiness 6 out of 10. And the kid, he or she rate the pain 4 out of 10. So according sa philosophic calculus, we need to sum up their happiness and their pain. So Bentham said that if the balance is in favor of please or the pleasure, then the act is morally right. If the balance naman is in favor of pain, then the act is morally wrong. So, based on story, we have 8, 2, 6, and 6. So, pag sinum up natin yun, yung 8, 2, 6, and 6, yung happiness lang. So, yung 4 is yung pang pain. So, mamaya na yung pain, happiness muna tayo. So, 8 plus 2 plus 6 plus 6 is equals to 22. So, 22 is the happiness rate of the 4 individuals. And the pain is 4, which is yung sakit. So, pag ginamit natin philosophic calculus, we can sum up and we can minus the happiness minus pain is equals to balance. So, again, 22, which is yung happiness, and minus 4, yung pain na naramdaman ng kid, is equals to 18. So, we get the 18, which is in favor of happiness. So, we can conclude that going into a restaurant is a morally right. So, dumako naman tayo kay John Stuart Mill. So, si John Stuart Mill ay pinanganak noong May 20, 1806, London in England, and died on May 8, 1873, at the age of 66 in Avignon, France. Siya ay isang English philosopher, economist, and exponent of utilitarianism. So he was prominent as a publicist in the reforming age of the 19th century and remains of lasting interest as a logician and an ethical theorist. So according kay Mill, it is morally right if the majority of the people that attains happiness. So, si Mill ay sumasalungat sa kiniklaim ni Bentham. Hindi siya sang-ayon na ang philosophic calculus ang pagbabasehan kung morally right or wrong ba yung naging resulta ng isang aksyon. So, there is a famous utilitarian claim that said that An act is right if it produces greatest happiness to the greatest number of people, and it is morally wrong if it produces more pain than pleasure to the greatest number of people concerned. So, kanina kiniklaim ni Bentham na gamit ang philosophic calculus, dito masusukat kung morally right or morally wrong ang resulta ng ginawang aksyon. Samantali, si Mill ay nagkiklaim na hindi siya sumasang-ayon kay Bentham. Instead, he said that it is morally right kung kapag nagbibigay ito ng pleasure sa mas madaming tao at morally wrong naman kapag ang isang aksyon ay nagbibigay ng sakit or pain sa madaming tao. Halimbawa na lamang dito kapag ikaw ay hindi dumalo sa isang kasal ng matalik mong kaibigan at madaming na-disappoint sa iyong ginawa. So according kay Mill, it is morally wrong. Kapag naman ikaw ay nag-cheat sa exam, bakit ka nag-cheat or bakit ka nag-cheat? Para tumaas ang score. So, aanihin mo yung pagtaas ng score. So, dahil ang score ay isa sa mga parang base para gumawa ng grade. So, para magkaroon ka ng mataas na grado. Na kung saan sa mataas na grado mo ay madaming matutuwa, including you, ikaw, mga kaibigan mo, pamilya mo, kamag-anak mo, na kung saan may kita natin na ang panduduga mo sa exam ay nagre-result ng kasiyahan sa madaming tao. Kaya we can conclude that this act is morally right. Sana naintindihan nyo ang aking ipinaliwanag at nagkaroon ng mas malawak na kaalaman patungkol sa utilitarianism. Now, let's move to the next topic.
Thank you, Teacher B, sa iyong malinaw na pagpapaliwanag. Ngayon naman ay dumako tayo sa pagpapaliwanag kung ano ang nilalaman ng principle of utility. The three generally accepted principles of utilitarianism stated that pleasure or happiness is the only thing that has intrinsic value. To say that something has intrinsic value means that it is simply good in itself. Ayon sa prinsipyo ng utilitarianism, ang pinakamahalaga sa lahat ay ang kaligayahan o kasiyahan ng tao. Ang kaligayahan ay tumutukoy sa ikabubuti ng sarili. Actions are right if they promote happiness and wrong if they promote unhappiness. Sinasabi rito na nakadepende ang tama o mali sa kung ano ang naidudulot ng aksyon. Kung ito ay nagdudulot ng kaligayahan, ito ay tama. Kung ito naman ay nagdudulot ng kalungkutan, ito ay mali. Ang tanong, ano ang binabatayan ng sinasaad na kaligayahan? So long as an action produces maximum benefits for the greatest number of people, utilitarianism does not care whether the results are driven by immoral motives. Sa madaling salita, ang focus ng utility ay para makapagdulot ng kaligayahan sa mas nakararaming tao kahit pa ang aksyon at desisyon ay dahil sa masamang motibo. Para mas lubos nating maunawaan, magbibigay ako ng isang halimbawa. Alam niyo ba ang kwento ni Robin Hood? Si Robin Hood ay itinuturing na bayani ng mga mahihirap. Bakit kaya? Dahil siya ay tumutulong sa maraming tao, ngunit sa pamamagitan ng pagnanakaw ng mga ari-arian mula sa mga mayayaman. Sa perspektibo ng Christian ethics, may ituturing itong immoral at hindi makatao, dahil ang pagnanakaw kailanman ay hindi mabuting gawi. Ngunit base sa prinsipyo ng utilitarianism, ang ginawa ni Robin Hood ay tama, dahil siya ay nakatulong sa mas nakararaming tao. Kaya't di alintana ni Robin Hood ang immoral na pagnanakaw niya mula sa mayayaman dahil mas mahalaga sa kanyang kaligayahan ng mas nakararami. Everyone's happiness counts equally. Ang kaligayahan ng bawat isa ay dapat pantay-pantay. Pag sinabing pantay-pantay, ay dapat wala nakalalamang o nanlalamang. Bentham's principle of equality makes the government responsible for creating policies that would benefit all equally, not just the elite. Sa pag-usbong ng teorya ni Bentham ay naging bukas ang gobyerno upang maging responsable sa pagbibigay ng pantay na hustisya at batas na magbibigay benepisyo para sa lahat at hindi lamang sa mga mayayaman o makapangyarihan. Justice as fairness is more context-bound. Parties concerned with fairness typically strive to work out something comfortable and adopt procedures that resemble rules of a game. Justice as fairness is more unique. Kaya't ang mga partido na may kinalaman sa pagiging patas ay karaniwan nagsusumikap na gumawa ng isang hakbang na magiging patas at magpatibay ng mga pamamaraan na katulad na lamang ng mga panuntunan ng isang laro. The principle of justice and fairness can be thought of as rules of fair play for issues of social justice. Sa usapin naman ng mga issues sa social justice o katarungang panlipunan, ang principle of justice and fairness ay maaaring isipin bilang mga patakaran ng patas na paglalaro. Kung ang mga ito ay nakabatay sa mga universal na batas o sa mga mas nakatali sa konteksto, tinutukoy ng mga prinsipyong ito ang paraan kung paano isinasagawa ang iba't ibang uri ng hustisya. There are 4 different types of justice: distributive, procedural, retributive, and restorative. Principles of distributive justice determine what counts as a fair share of particular good, while principles of retributive or restorative justice shape our response to activity that violates a society's rules as fair play. Social justice requires both that the rules be fair and also that people play by the rules. Kapag sinabing distributive justice, ito ay pagbibigay ng pantay na pamamahagi ng serbisyo o benepisyo. Halimbawa nito ang mga pampublikong programa na nagbibigay ng social security o pangangalagang medikal sa lahat ng matatanda at retiradong tao. Kapag sinabi namang retributive, ito ay ang kaparusahan sa maling paggawa. Halimbawa, ang isang taong nakagawa ng pagpatay ay maaaring parusahan sa iba't ibang paraan ng iba't ibang sistema. Sa madaling salita, kung ikaw ay nakagawa ng isang kasalanan, halimbawa ang pagpatay, ay dapat ka lamang maparusahan ng katumbas na bigat ng iyong nagawa. Halimbawa sa ibang bansa ay ang pagbitay, ngunit sa ating bansa, ang bansang Pilipinas, ay maitutumbas ito sa panghabang buhay na pagkakabilanggo. Ang restorative justice ay isang approach to justice kung saan ang tugon sa krimen ay ang pag-organisa ng isang pagpupulong sa pagitan ng biktima at ng nagkasala. Minsan kasama ang mga kinatawan ng mas malawak na komunidad. Dito ay pinag-aayos ang dalawang panig. Ang social justice ay kinakailangan ng maging patas, di lamang sa mismong batas, gayon din sa mga tao. People often frame justice issues in terms of fairness and invoke principles of justice and fairness to explain their satisfaction or dissatisfaction with the organizations they are part of, as well as their state or government. People who produce more or better products, either by working harder or by being more talented, this argument goes, should be paid more for their efforts than should people who produce less. May mga tao sa ating lipunan na di nakatatanggap ng patas na pagtrato at di nakatatanggap ng tamang benepisyo sa kanilang trabaho. Karapatan naman talaga nating magreklamo kung ganito ang magiging sitwasyon natin. Karapatan nating sumahod na naayon sa ating paggawa. Kaya't malaking tulong na mapag-aralan ang ganitong topic. Deserts, equity, equality, and need. According to the principle of equity, a fair economic system is one that distributes goods to individuals in proportion to their input. While input typically comes into the form of productivity, ability or talent might also play a role. Ang principle of equity ay nagpapahiwatig ng isang kamalayan ng pagiging patas at katarungan sa lahat ng mga manggagawa na nagtatrabaho sa isang organisasyon. Ang pagsunod sa katarungan na ito ay gagawing tapat ang mga manggagawa. A principle of need, on the other hand, proposes that we strive for an equal outcome in which all society or group members get what they need. Thus, poor people would get more money and richer people would get less. Ang pagiging patas ay sentral din sa procedural, retributive at restorative justice. Ang ganitong mga prinsipyo ay dapat natiyakin ang mga pamamaraan na bumubuo na walang pinapanigan, pare-pareho at maaasahang mga desisyon. ensure fair procedures both in the context of legal proceedings as well as in negotiation and mediation. The third party carrying out those procedures must be impartial. For example, judges should be impartial and facilitators should not exhibit any prejudice that gives one party unfair advantages. Principle of consistency proposes that the distinction of some versus others should reflect genuine aspects of personal identity rather than extraneous features of the differentiating mechanism itself. Might follow from this principle that all stakeholders should have a voice in the decision-making process. In particular, disadvantaged members of a group or society should be empowered and given an opportunity to be heard. When decision-making procedures treat people with respect and dignity, they feel affirmed. Sinasabi rito na maaaring sundin mula sa prinsipyong ito na ang lahat ng stakeholders ay dapat magkaroon ng boses sa proseso ng paggawa ng desisyon. Sa particular, ang mga disadvantaged na miyembro ng isang grupo o lipunan ay bigyan ng pagkakataon na makapagpahayag ng kanilang opinyon. Kapag ang mga pamamaraan sa paggawa ng desisyon ay tinatrato ang mga tao ng may paggalang at dignidad, sila ay nakararamdam ng paninindigan. Another example for restorative justice is that those directly affected by the offense should have a voice and representation in the decision-making process regarding the aftermath of the offense, be it punishment and or restitution. What is so important about the principles of justice? The principles of justice and fairness point to ideas of fair treatment and fair play that should govern all modes of exchange and interaction in a society. Serve as guidelines for carrying out justice. At dahil ang pangunahing prinsipyo ng teoryang utilitarianism ay ang pagiging patas at kaligayahan ng mas nakararami, maging gabay sana ang mga prinsipyong ito upang mapanatili ng hustisya ay naibibigay, mahirap ka man o mayaman. Hanggang dyan na lamang ang aking pagtatalakay, ipinapasa ko na kay Teacher Kang.
Hello again, class of BSED Phil 1. I am back again and again. I am Teacher Kang, and in this part of the presentation, we will tackle the different kinds of utilitarianism. So without further ado, let's begin. Before we discuss the different kinds of utilitarianism, let us review the definition of utilitarianism first. So, in simple definition, utilitarianism tells us that an act is morally right if it produces greatest happiness to the greatest number of people, and it is morally wrong if it produces more pain than pleasure to the greatest number of people concerned. Ang ibig sabihin lamang nito ay masasabing morally right ang isang kilos o gawa kung ang resulta nito ay lubos na kasiyahan sa mas maraming tao at maituturing namang morally wrong kung ang dulot ng isang kilos o gawa ay sakit o lungkot kaysa kasiyahan sa maraming tao. Sa madaling salita, ang utilitarianism ay nagpo-focus sa kasiyahan na nararamdaman ng mga tao sa lipunan. Now that we are done with the review of utilitarianism, let us now move on to the different kinds of utilitarianism. Coming to the first kind of utilitarianism, in the work of English philosopher, economist, political scientist, legal scholar, and social reformer Jeremy Bentham, a branch of utilitarianism known as quantitative utilitarianism, also known as Benthamite utilitarianism, emerged. According to Bentham, all pleasures are alike in nature. He said that an action is regarded as moral if it produces pleasure, while it is considered as wrong or immoral if it produces pain. Bentham also believes that pleasure or utility have quantitative differences. Now, ano ang ibig sabihin nito? It means that quantitative utilitarianism holds that every action has some more pleasure and some pleasure it is less for the individual who performs it. Take a look at this example. Your favorite K-pop boy band group will hold a concert in Manila in December this year. You feel ecstatic hearing the news that you check the possible prices of tickets for their concert. As soon as you see the price list of the ticket, you realize that you can't go to the concert because you can't afford to buy a ticket. So rito, as a fan of that specific K-pop boy band group, syempre kapag narinig mo na pupunta sila rito sa bansa natin and mag-hold pa ng concert, ang feeling mo is parang nasa cloud 9 ka kasi your idols will breathe the same air as you. So yung pleasure na naramdaman mo is more in nature and is more in measure or utility kaysa sa pleasure na nararamdaman mo nung na-realize mong hindi ka makakapunta sa concert nila dahil hindi mo afford yung ticket. So kung nagtataka kayo kung bakit kanina ko pa sinasabi ang word na utility, so basically utility means pleasure and pain are capable of quantification. So meaning ang pleasure at pain na nararamdaman ng isang tao ay maaari niyang masukat. So quantitative utilitarianism or Benthamine utilitarianism was introduced by Jeremy Bentham, and under this, he also came up with a theory of utility. The second kind of utilitarianism is qualitative or what we call refined utilitarianism, which was introduced by John Stuart Mill. According to this theory, all pleasures are not alike. So in this part, we can already conclude that this kind of utilitarianism is the opposite of quantitative utilitarianism. In Mill's view, he believes that some pleasures are more important or more desirable than others. So base dito, the quality is something which a person should definitely depend upon when talking about utility. With this, he believed that pleasure or utility has qualitative differences. Ibig sabihin, some pleasures are intrinsically better than the others. John Stuart Mill asserted that only those who had actually experienced higher pleasures could recognize them. So taking the same example na ginamit natin sa quantitative utilitarianism, dito sa qualitative utilitarianism, we could say that the pleasure you feel nung nalaman mo na magkakaroon ng concert yung favorite K-pop boy band group mo sa Manila has a different quality or is qualitatively superior kaysa sa pleasure na naramdaman mo nung na-realize mong hindi ka makakapunta sa concert. Let us now move on to the third kind, which is negative utilitarianism, which was introduced by Karl Popper. According to him, he argues that the principle maximize pleasure should be replaced by minimize pain, which means that we should act to minimize suffering of pain and not maximize pleasure. Negative utilitarianism is totally different from the first two kinds because here Karl Popper says that it aims is that the maximize pleasure principle should be replaced by minimum pain pleasure. Ibig sabihin, Karl Popper says that instead of the maximum or greatest happiness of the greatest number of people, we should aim at the minimum pain to the maximum number of people. Naniniwala rin si Popper na it is not only impossible but very dangerous to attempt to maximize the pleasure or the happiness of the people since such an attempt must lead to totalitarianism. Ibig sabihin, ibig sabihin nito, hindi lang imposible bagkus ay mapanganib din na subukang i-maximize ang pleasure o kasiyahan ng tao dahil magreresulta lang ito sa pagkontrol sa lahat ng aspeto ng buhay ng isang tao sa pamamagitan ng pamimilit at panunupil. Dahil dito nawawala ng individual freedom ang isang tao. The fourth kind is what we call act utilitarianism, which is advocated also by Jeremy Bentham. So, act utilitarianism is a utilitarian theory of ethics that states that a person's act is morally right if and only if it produces the best possible results in that situation. So, Bentham says that morality is an effect of an action that gives maximum pleasure to the maximum number of people because based on what we are reading on the PPT, the moral worth of an act is determined by its utility to the people. So when the maximum number of people get the maximum number of pleasure, we will consider the act as moral in nature. To understand how act utilitarianism works, here are the examples. The first one is we are going to compare the consequences of watching television all day tomorrow to the consequences of studying for the exams tomorrow. One could produce more overall happiness to the person by studying for the exams tomorrow than by watching television all day tomorrow. According to utilitarianism then, ang tama at mabuting gawin bukas ay mag-aral para sa darating na exams dahil matutulungan ka nitong makakuha ng mataas na marka at mali na manatili lang sa bahay at matuod ng TV buong araw. Next is we are going to compare the consequence of partying with your friends today than the consequences of doing your pending activities today. Sa example na to, one could produce overall happiness to the person by doing all the activities and passing them before the deadlines today, rather than by partying with his or her friends today. Act utilitarianism is often contrasted with a different theory called utilitarianism or rule utilitarianism, which is advocated by Brad Hooker and a number of utilitarians. According to this kind of utilitarianism, the moral worth of an action is determined by the rule which leads to maximum pleasure for the maximum number of people. So basically, ang sinasabi sa rule utilitarianism is the correctness of the rule or action is determined based on the amount of pleasure it brings when it is applied or when it is put in force. So rule utilitarianism is a form of utilitarianism that says an action is right as it conforms to a rule that leads to the greatest good, or that the rightness or wrongness of a particular action is a function of the correctness of the rule which or of which it is an instance. There are some examples of rule utilitarianism that I'm going to share with you. The first example is you are given a chance to choose between two ice cream flavors, which are cookies and cream and cheese. So you chose cookies and cream because it is your favorite flavor, rather than cheese because you are allergic to it. So basically, if you are choosing ice cream for yourself, the utilitarian view is that you should choose the flavor that will give you the most pleasure. If your favorite is cookies and cream but allergic to cheese, you should choose cookies and cream for the pleasure it will bring and avoid cheese because it will bring displeasure. Next is road rules or laws are examples of rule utilitarianism. While it is true that sometimes a person can drive safely even when not following a marked speed limit, it is preferable for all people to follow a standard set of road rules regardless of individual scenarios, because following road rules would help lessen the road accidents and it will bring pleasure to both commuters and drivers. Next is ideal utilitarianism introduced by Hastings Randall. So this kind of utilitarianism rejects that the sole object or the sole motive of a moral action is to maximize pleasure. In ideal utilitarianism, it recognizes beauty and friendship, as well as pleasure as intrinsic good that one's actions should aim to maximize. Ano ba ang intrinsic good? Intrinsic good means that something is worthwhile not because it leads to something else, but for its own sake alone. Ang example nito is friendship. According to the Greek philosopher Aristotle, friendship has value in itself, and it's not merely a means to obtain something else. So it's true, friendship itself already has its value, and in ideal utilitarianism, it is one's action should aim to maximize. So basically, according to Hastings' theory, the model worth of an action is based on the values and not on the result of the action, and that value should maximize rather than pleasure. The seventh kind of utilitarianism is called preference utilitarianism, also known as preferentialism. According to preference utilitarianism, the moral worth of an action is determined not by fulfilling the greatest pleasure for the greatest number of people, but by fulfilling the greatest amount of personal interests. Hence, the moral worth of an action is based on the concept of utility, which is defined as individual preference because it is subjective in nature and varies from one person to another. So, from the term itself, preference, it is the act or opportunity of choosing. It is also suggests a choice guided by one's judgment or predilections. So, lastly, in preference utilitarianism, actions are considered right if they maximize the satisfactions of interest or preferences or desires of a person, no matter what the preferences he or she may have. Next is two-level utilitarianism, which is introduced by Richard Mervyn here, or usually cited as R.M. here. According to this theory, the moral worth of an action should be based on rule utilitarianism, except in certain circumstances where it is more appropriate to use act utilitarianism. Anong ibig sabihin nito? Here accepts that rule utilitarianism collapses into act utilitarianism but claims that this is a result of allowing the rules to be as specific and general as we please. Sinabi niya rin na ang isa sa pinakadahilan kung bakit inintroduce niya ang rule utilitarianism was to do justice to the general rules that people need for moral education and character development. He proposes that a difference between act utilitarianism and rule utilitarianism can be introduced by limiting the specificity of the rules, an example by increasing their generality. So it is quite simple to understand it as a synthesis or combining factor of both act and rule utilitarianism. The last kind of utilitarianism is what we call average utilitarianism, which is introduced by Hendrik Sidgwick. Average utilitarianism is also known as averagism. According to average utilitarianism, instead of concerning the maximum pleasure of the maximum number of people concerned, average pleasure should instead be maximized. In simpler words of definition, Sidgwick values the maximization of average pleasure or average utility among people instead of greatest happiness of the greatest number of people. To end this part of my discussion, let us have a list first of the 9 kinds of utilitarianism. The first kind of utilitarianism is the gross utilitarianism, also called as quantitative utilitarianism, followed by refined or qualitative utilitarianism. Next is negative utilitarianism, act utilitarianism, rule utilitarianism, ideal utilitarianism, preference utilitarianism, two-level utilitarianism, and the average utilitarianism. And that's the end of my discussion. I hope you learned something from the topic I have presented.
Finally, nasa dulo na tayo ng ating discussion. Ito ang connection between utilitarianism and ethics. Ngunit bago ko sabihin o bago natin alamin kung ano ang connection ng utilitarianism at ethics, atin munang i-define kung ano ang utilitarianism at kung ano ang ethics. When we say utilitarianism is an ethical choice is the one that will produce the greatest good for the greatest number. While ethics, nagko-contribute ito ng common good for all. Ibig sabihin, walang ethics kung walang utilitarianism. Walang utilitarianism kung walang ethics. Again, hello BSED Phil 1. Our group hopes that you are still with us and you learn something from the reporters. To end our group presentation, we prepared 10-item quiz to know and evaluate if you really understand a thing or two from our topic discussion. Thank you so much for your cooperation and presence today. Good luck on your quiz and have a nice day ahead.